Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dr. Regina Bradley, and this is Outkasted Conversations, number 17. So I'm excited because I got one of the heavy hitters with us today, Mr. Mychal Denzel Smith. What's going on, good sir?
Ain't much. I'm happy to be here. You had all the heavy hitters on already. I'm coming up bad cleanup.
No, no cleanup, no cleanup. We just started to dig into this thing. So you know what you have to do to get into the club. How did you become outcasted?
All right. So the thing is, I grew up in a household where like my parents are the most respectability politics abiding folks. And hip hop was just not really a thing that was allowed. I had to sneak and listen to everything that I did, but one thing I did manage to get was the Elevators cassette tape when it came out. So that was my first introduction to Outkast. I think that just everybody loved that song. I mean, you could not love that. You know, even if you were my parents that like just loved Luther Vandross to death and thought that everything else was just sacrilegious. You know what I mean? Like Elevators is just that track. But I mean, at that time, I don't think I appreciated Outkast for who they were. I mean, I was only like 9 when Elevators came out. But later on, listen, when I finally like could appreciate and hear Aquemini for real, that's when I think I became outcasted in the sense that Outkast officially became like my favorite group ever to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Aquemini was a game changer for me. I mean, I really love AT Aliens too, but Aquemini was my first really like, and I was laughing because I used to have to sneak cassette tapes too, like when cassettes
Yeah.
were singles.
Right, right.
Let me get that 99-cent cassette single. Um, the kids don't know what they're missing these days. So you are a writer, a very prolific writer at that. So when you talk about can you tell us a little bit about some of the subject matter that you discuss in your pieces?
I'm mostly concerned with black male identity, and I think that that encompasses a lot of different things. So it's addressing the political moment that we're in, as far as this the election of Barack Obama to the presidency has us talking about race in a certain way that I feel like people are trying to convince me that racism is done, right? Like that we've moved on. I don't like to use post-racial, but like that's essentially what people are trying to convince me that this era is. And looking at my own experience, looking at the experience of a Trayvon Martin or a Jordan Davis or an Oscar Grant, like I know that that's not the case. But I'm also interested in the ways that black men move within our community, right? Like, so that's where the feminist critique comes in such that while we're looking at the effects that racism has on black male identity and the way that we move through the world, we're also addressing this form of what I think of as toxic masculinity that has been allowed to perpetuate itself within our community and allow us to coddle black men in a certain way that then excuses the oppression of black women, but also then we look at it from a perspective of sexuality where we offer primacy to heterosexual black men in ways that delegitimize the identities of people who do not identify as hetero, and across like the idea of gender as a binary, right? Like we're trying to wrestle with that right now as people who are gender queer or trans are gaining more of a public voice. Like we're trying to wrestle with that now. So that's my project, is like dealing with black male identity and all of the aspects that we see expressed in our society.
Yo, I really like that term, toxic masculinity. I think that's heavy because on the one hand, when you think toxic masculinity, especially if you're thinking about black masculinity in popular spaces, you automatically go to hip hop. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like that's a cop out. You know what I mean? So if we were to use that term that you're talking about to talk about outcast and this idea of black masculinity and community, what are some of the ways that we can use that theory to kind of think through the complexities that outcast presents in terms of what we understand black masculinity looks like in hip hop.
Yeah, so Outkast is like part of the reason they're my favorite is because they have this embrace of these different types of masculinities, and that they play with them, and they don't necessarily place them in contradiction with one another. What they're doing is placing them in conversation with one another, and looking at the commonalities between them. So Outkast can go from being pimps and players and gangsters and preachers and you know, dandies and, you know, all of these different things, and like the musician, the artist, the intellectual, the thinker, and all of that type of stuff, and not miss a beat in terms of that. So they're embracing all of the I mean, when you're talking about being pimps and gangs, like, they're embracing the fact that those are the folks that they came up with. Those are the folks that taught them, that helped them get to the place that they are. Even as they're watching them go through these destructive modes, right? Like, they know that being a pimp is ultimately not the highlight that you want it to be, but there's a certain representation of pimps and pimp culture that has an expression of masculinity, of achievement, right? Like, that you can, and it's steeped in like patriarchal, very misogynist thinking, but the idea that you can extract from another human being your way of living, your monetary, your money and everything. Like, there's a certain level of achievement to that they see, that they embrace, right? But then there's also the other side of that. There's the thing that they embrace about being a gangster, in that they just take no shit from anyone, right? Like, they're absolutely brazen and aggressive in the way that they approach their music and the way that they approach their lives. But that also has another side to it, where, you know, we understand that being a gangster means that you are out in the streets, and that your life is on the line, and that you are taking the lives of other people. So like, they're embracing all of these different identities. Like, they're embracing preachers, but understand that preachers are in some ways pimping their pulpit sometimes, and like, you know what I mean? Like being the prosperity preachers that are getting all this money from their congregation, but not offering any real salvation. And like, they're critiquing that, but at the same time embracing the gospel sounds that they associate with these preachers. So Outkast is just able to move in all of those different spaces, but it doesn't mean that they don't at the same time sometimes reflect the more detrimental aspects of those identities. And that's kind of what I was addressing in the piece that I wrote for Feministing, is that, like, what's disappointing, particularly around Andre, right? Like, Andre is like Big Boi is playing with different identities, but we know who Big Boi, like, Big Boi is the pimp, like, he is the pimp of the duo. But Andre is like all of those different things at all different times, and like constantly wrestling and constantly reimagining himself, and constantly trying to push boundaries. But the way that he looks at womanhood is really a classic patriarchal, like, setup of a hierarchy of womanhood, where he says, you know, at their reunion show at Coachella, he's asking, are there any hoes in here? Are there any bitches? Are there any ladies? And like, setting up this idea whereby you fit into one of these categories, and then you are afforded a certain level of respect based on which category you fit in. And I think that that's part of what is disappointing about Outkast, is that they can see for themselves and for other black men these different possibilities and the idea of interchange between those identities, but can't then reconcile that with also allowing black women, particularly, that space.
I mean, when you were talking about this whole idea of, you know, the inability to allow for the complexities of womanhood to exist in their music, I also thought about the connections with that to the South. You know what I'm saying? Like, when we think about ideas of politics of respectability, they still run very rampant in the South, even after, you know, kind of these major milestones, supposedly, of black progress in the South, like the Civil Rights Movement, stuff like that. So on the one hand, I'm with you in terms of, I'm going to need for you to be more, you know, aware and conscious of the way that you're depicting a majority of your fans. A lot of fans of Outkast are women,
Right, right.
myself included. But also, you know, the idea that, you know, if we think about the South as an influence on the type of gender politics that you're talking about, what role does that play in terms of how we understand, you know, gender in Outkast music, but just gender politics in general when we talk about blackness and identity in the 21st century?
Yeah, so I mean that's exactly like what's so appealing about Outkast is that they are so particularly Southern, right? And in a way that like I think that we in hip hop, I'm gonna get to the question, but in hip hop, like what was beautiful about it at one point, and I don't want to sound like the old fogies, like, oh, hip hop used to be so much, but what was beautiful about it at one point is that you have very distinct regional sounds, right? So Biggie sounded like Brooklyn. Like if you visit Brooklyn and you like I live in Brooklyn now, like you bump Biggie, like you understand why he created the music that he did. If you go out west and you visit the beaches and you visit Compton and like everything, you'll understand why Dr. Dre and Snoop were making the music that they were. When you go to Atlanta, you know exactly why Outkast sounds the way that they do. Like when you blast that, like when you ride around in your Oldsmobile and like listen to AT Aliens, you understand exactly what they were trying to, the sound that they were trying to capture and why they were trying to capture it, because Atlanta gives you that feeling, right? And so everything that they do is this particular Southern influence thing, because that's who they are. And so, yes, their gender politics also are reflective of black gender politics in the South, particularly informed by black Southern churches, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
like they're the, you know, even like something like Jazzy Belle, right? Like that's something that they're embracing on an idea that the women that are respectable, the women that you're supposed to marry, the women that you're supposed to take home to moms, are not the ones that you're going to find out in the club listening to the music that they produce. They're going to be the ones that you find in church on Sunday, like in the choir, wearing the pearls and the conservative heels and all of that. Like that's and then they're going to go home and they're going to cook Sunday dinner, and like they're going to be raising up the children. Like those are the women that they respect, because those are the women that become the matriarchs and become the most respected members of your family, right? Like, because that's Big Mama. Like that's what they're trying to get at, is that if you're not a woman who I see a potential to be Big Mama to my family, you are not then one that I want to engage in a level that's like intimate and allow you the space for complexity, but missing that Big Mama wasn't always Big Mama, right? Like Big Mama got to where she was not necessarily because she wanted to, even like because there's an idea of womanhood placed on her that was imposed on her, and that she didn't have access to a lot of the same things that that women today now have access to. So the idea of a woman being the breadwinner, but doing it because she wanted to work, right? Like in black families, we've always had women working, but a woman working because she wanted to work, and like focusing on her career as an aspect of her identity. Like that's not something that we're really accustomed to. We're not accustomed to the idea of a black woman having control over her reproductive rights and her you know what I'm saying, like using birth control, going to get an abortion, like things like that. Like we're not accustomed to having that conversation. Those are things that you keep quiet, that people don't talk about, right? So when we're talking like the romanticization of Big Mama and what they're searching for is steeped in all of these other ideas that they haven't really wrestled with and haven't allowed for modernity to like take hold.
Yeah, I love that. That was awesome. No, but it also makes me think about. I know that you're part of the Brothers Writing to Live collective. You know,
Yeah.
shouts out to you all. You are doing some really transformative work with your writing. But it also made me think about, this idea of radical love as a response to the toxic masculinity that you're talking about, right? Like what that means in terms of, oftentimes when we think about this idea of love in hip hop, folks go to Atlanta, they go to New York, you know what I'm saying? But, to really think about the ways that we can use love to transform these kind of concepts of misogyny and patriarchy in useful ways. So, what are some of your thoughts on the ways that this idea of radical love can be applied to Outkast, and also, what are some of the ways that they present love as a radical form of social transformation?
Wow. I think that this, I mean, it's a great question, but I think that, like, in terms of love as being like this radical act that allows for transformation, I think that that's what we're trying to embody with Brothers Writing to Live, right? So in the challenging of that toxic masculinity, what we're trying to do with one another is to push each other to think further and to think through our experiences in a way that challenges the dominant patriarchal misogynist thinking that we've been indoctrinated with, right? So we've all been doing that project on our own, but I think that the community is one that that helps push you further, and I think that that's another thing about, like, Southern tradition is like community building. So like we're doing the backyard barbecues, we're doing the fish fries, you know what I mean, and like going to church with one another, and like being at one another's house, doing hair and all these type of things, and talking to one another. Like that community building aspect is something that I think that is really important to us. And I think that the way that Outkast models like love is like in one way, like they put their kids on their records, like, you know what I mean, like that's type of thing, you know what I mean, that's really like this incredibly simple thing that you don't think of, but the idea that Big Boi has his little boy on a record rapping along with him, like that's just a form of love that challenges. It embraces a certain type of like masculinity that's identifiable to us, but also challenges in another way the notion of black fatherhood as absent, like the notion that black fathers are not involved. Like he's involved, but he's involved in a particular way that makes sense to him. Like he knows how to relate to his child through rap music in a way that maybe we would like. Respectability politics would like you to say, well, are you not like going to take your kid to a museum or like, but here's an entry point, right? Like, and I don't want to, we can't dismiss anyone's entry point to a love that's expressive for them, and I think that they express love for Atlanta, right? Like just the fact that they hold it down and like have never not sounded like Atlanta, like because they love that physical place. They can invite Raekwon and Be Real on records and still sound like Atlanta. Like they can invite Jay-Z on a record and still sound like Atlanta because they have such love and respect for the place that they come from. That radically transformed them, like the history of Atlanta and being like a center of civil rights movement and black culture and black religiosity, like all of those things informing them. And I think they have a deep love for that, and that they express all the time. And I think they have a love for the history of hip hop. Like I think that they more than any group may represent the connection to the past and the progression towards the future, right? Like they embrace like all of the sounds that we come to know from hip hop, like funk and blues and jazz and all of those things that have informed the foundations. But then you listen to each record, like you go from Southern Playalistic to AT Aliens to Queminada Stankonia, and none of them sound the same. Like they all sound like very distinct records because they're pushing hip hop to, and they don't sound like anything else that was out at the time either, right? Like they sound nothing like what you heard on the radio, nothing like the other classic records of the era, because they're pushing hip hop constantly to think outside of itself and to think beyond its physical limitations or its sonic limitations that we kind of imposed on it as the like purists think that hip hop should sound this way. It's like not everybody's going to be DJ Premier. Like DJ Premier is amazing, right? But it's not all boom bap New York 90s like stuff. Like we can move beyond that. We can incorporate these new sounds and it still remain deeply in love with hip hop. I think that's a separation that I would make from like a Kanye, right? Like Kanye experiments with all of these different sounds, but he's trying to not sound hip hop. Like he's trying to push us beyond this idea of hip hop and be bigger than hip hop. But Outkast is deeply rooted in hip hop culture and hip hop traditions while pushing us forward, and I think that they model love in that way. That's transformative.
All right, glory, Mr. Smith. So, tell the folks how they can holler at you, what you got going on with your life.
Always writing at thenation.com, feministing.com. You can hit me up on Twitter at Mychal Smith. I got some other projects in the works that hopefully will be interesting to people, as interesting to other people as they are to me. But you never can tell with that stuff. But just keeping it moving, keep trying to do this work, trying to keep up with Dr. Regina Bradley, trying to keep up with all these folks doing this amazing work and pushing me to think further.
I appreciate you for giving us a little bit of your time, good sir. I'm Dr. Regina Bradley. This is Outkasted Conversations. We'll holler at y'all next week. Y'all be easy.